Hello and welcome to Haemcast. I'm Catherine Jenner. In this episode, Khair speaks with Helen Tate. Helen is from Sunderland. She's a dance teacher, a trustee of the Haemophilia Society, and she has Factor V deficiency. Factor V deficiency affects around 1 in a million people, making Helen very rare. Her strength and drive enable her to lead an active life despite limited treatment and a lack of understanding of her condition. And she's clearly a passionate advocate for people with rare bleeding disorders, as you'll hear.
Do you want to just start off by telling us a little bit about who you are and how you got diagnosed with the bleeding disorder?
Yes, so my name is Helen Tate. I'm 36 and I was diagnosed with Factor V deficiency actually at birth. So at birth I had an intracranial bleed in my local hospital, and really I'm very lucky that one of the local doctors kind of thought, oh, hang on a minute, there's something really wrong here. So I nearly died, actually. Very scary time for my parents. So straight away, really, I got referred to my local haemophilia centre, which I suppose is quite unusual, actually, especially, I would say, for a woman and for someone with something so rare.
How did they pick up the intracranial hemorrhage, and then how did they go, oh, bleeding disorder?
Well, actually, when I came out, like the entire top of my head was black.
Okay.
Very swollen. So I think my mum showed me a picture of it, and it's very, very obvious. It kind of looked like I had hair, dark hair from the old photos.
And some great paediatrician or neonatologist that went, oh, this isn't quite right. We need to investigate this quickly and get you onto the right track for treatment.
Yeah, I think when I was younger, I had a polar bear teddy that was named after the doctor that discovered it.
So you said then you got diagnosed and went off for treatment, but there isn't even now really good treatment for Factor V deficiency. So, what did you have? Do you know? And what do you get now when you bleed?
So at the time, and it's still the same now, it's FFP, or now I get Octaplas, which is a kind of version of FFP. And now for smaller bleeds, really tranexamic acid, and that is really it. So I suppose I would say I only really would go to the hospital for a big bleed. For smaller ones, you just kind of manage it the best you can and hope it stops. And eventually it does. But it has caused chaos on several occasions. And I think because it's so rare, there's not really anyone to talk to. And I think sometimes you think, is this a bleed? Is this not a bleed? What does it feel like? And sometimes even when you go to the haemophilia centre, they're not even sure because there's no one else to really compare it with. Very few people really. So I would say I'm quite lucky. I would say it's gone through phases. Like when I was younger, obviously you have a lot of bumps and falls and things. And then as you grow into your teenage years, obviously you start your periods and that causes absolute chaos. And then I had this lovely period in my 20s where, apart from unless I hurt myself, it was all quite fine and dandy. And now I would say the issue of menstruation and my periods is coming back to bite me later.
How do you decide what is a bad bleed? And then perhaps we'll talk about your periods, which probably are bad bleeds.
I decide when it's a bad bleed. Generally, like, for example, I had a bad knee bleed and it was kind of niggling for a while and it would hurt and it wasn't quite straight. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I thought, oh, it will get a bit better. A bad bleed is when the pain is unbearable, or if it's coming out of me, I just can't control it and it's stopped everything else in my life. That's what I would say is a bad bleed that goes on for several days.
And I think if we read the textbooks, you would kind of, first off, there's hardly anything written about living with Factor V deficiency, but I don't think that people would necessarily talk about internal bleeds and being painful. That's much more something boys with haemophilia get a knee bleed kind of thing. So is it just, in inverted commas, joint bleeds that you have, or is it that you're having other internal bleeds that are painful?
It's kind of calmed down a bit, but when I was a teenager especially, I would have this absolutely horrendous abdominal pain that wasn't really discovered what it was. And I went to the GP a few times because I didn't even connect the dots there. And they were like, oh, you have IBS and everything. And it wasn't until I actually collapsed with blood loss that someone actually took a blood count and looked at it. And it turns out it was ovulation related bleeding. This had gone on for 2.5, 3 years, where every now and again, I would just be absolutely bedridden for weeks. And even my parents at one point thought I was just lying because I wanted to be off school. And then after about 2 or 3 years, they kind of brushed it under the carpet, like, oh, we'll just put her on the pill, it'll be fine. And then I was on the pill for absolutely years. But I had this fear of coming off the pill because I remember, like, I missed my French GCSE speaking exam. I had it recorded in a cupboard a few weeks later. I remember I was doing dance GCSE at the time, and I'd had like massive internal bleeding and I really wasn't well enough. And I remember thinking, I've got to get to the end of this dance or I'm not going to pass my exam. And I remember like towards the last few seconds, like I couldn't even see. So I had this massive fear about coming off the pill. But then once you've been on it so long, things start to go wrong. It affected my blood pressure and things. So I came off. And for a while, everything was fine until it wasn't.
Yeah.
Kind of my bleeding would be very light on my period. And then there would be absolute flooding everywhere. I did have a few other ovulation bleeds, but they weren't as bad. So they kind of resolved themselves. But as well in that period, kind of tranexamic acid became part of my life, whereas I don't really understand, but it wasn't when I was younger. So that has helped. But they say, oh, take it for a maximum of 2 weeks and then have a break. And I'm thinking, well, that was like 4 months ago. Where's the balance?
When you do have a bad period, it is the treatment that you have to go to hospital to get FFP.
It depends. I would say, luckily, I'm quite healthy in the way that I'm active and I somehow manage, even though like, there's a few times when the bleeding has been kind of out of control and I have not been able to leave the house, but it hasn't affected my HB that much. But then sometimes it does. And yes, then I will have to go and get FFP. But then I would say in more recent years, obviously after the infected blood scandal and things, they're a lot less, like more reluctant to give it. And it's like, unless you're going to drop dead imminently, it's the quality of life is, I would say, more in the balance than it used to be.
And how does that make you feel? I mean, we sort of say these days that plasma is as safe as it can be and that nobody has been infected for many years. Do you think that's still a justified concern? Are you concerned about it?
If I'm honest, I am not that concerned about it. But I would say when I go to the hospital, they are concerned about it. But it honestly has made me feel really, really isolated and not listened to. I mean, there's been times that I've been absolutely desperate, thinking I can't go to work. Like, I'm a dance teacher, and there's been times when I've just had to get someone to cover my class while I have went in the bathroom and stayed there. And I would say sometimes that isn't listened to. It's like, oh, well, you're not immediately dying. And I'm thinking, yes, but I can't live my life.
Yeah.
And that is a massive problem. That is a massive worry in my life all of the time. And then there's the fact that kind of you get 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And the answer is, well, just go back on the pill. And I'm thinking, well, no, not really.
Really tricky conversations. And I know that you are a very good advocate for standing up for yourself. Do you think that is your character, or do you think that's something that you've had to become because of the issues that you've had with your bleeding?
I think it's something I've had to become. I think in the past, I just kind of took whatever was said at face value. And then just by chance, I saw on the Haemophilia Society website, they were looking for someone to go to the World Fed. So I applied. This was years ago, but it got cancelled because of COVID. So I applied again and went last year. And it kind of opened my eyes to actually, it should be more of a shared decision-making process. And in the past, really, I'd been sent away, and why was I waiting until I literally like could have chopped my own leg off, or I kind of just wish I'd died in the night? Why did it take that for me to then get treatment? So really, it's something that I think I've had to become, because otherwise, well, progress won't be made. I mean, really, there's not very many of us. If I'm not going to say anything, who is?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And you sort of alluded to there not being very many of you. So According to the UK HCDO, there's 300 people with factor V deficiency in the country. Only 5 of those were treated in 2024. So you are a really tiny group. You were one of them. So there's 4 others. How do you then advocate for such a small number of people?
By saying yes to things like this. And I've spoke on a webinar, and all of these things I think are really foreign to me. I'm not a massively confident public speaker or anything. But I feel like more work is now being done in the res, and I feel like we're getting kind of more publicity. We're more, I'm going to say more interesting / fashionable. But I think because treatments have come so far for haemophilia and things, there's now room for us. And I think now's our time to speak out about struggles that we've had, because it's so hard when you go to the hospital and not even they understand. There isn't even a lot. Like, I think I joined a res group and they said, well, what do you know about your bleeding disorder? And I was thinking, well, I've even tried to do a bit of research and not that much is the answer. And then even the amount of people that have it, like if you look on different websites, it's very different numbers, like very different numbers. So you don't even really know that.
And so have you met other people who've got it?
So my dad's cousin was diagnosed years ago. And then I met, well, 2 women actually. One is younger and one is older when I went to the Erin Summit last December in Zagreb. So they were the first women really I'd met. We've exchanged numbers, and it's nice to have someone to talk to, because I feel like my dad's cousin is a man and we do not have the same issues. It was kind of still being isolated, even though there was someone there.
Yeah, and do you just want to tell us what the Erin group is and what it is trying to do?
So it's the European Rare and Inhibitor Network. I first heard about it through kind of a mutual friend in one of the UK Rares groups, and they're really trying to kind of connect people on a European level. I think when you're rare, it's hard to find someone else close and kind of people that have had the same experiences as you. So they've been doing kind of a series of webinars on different issues that people with rare and inhibitors kind of face. And then they do hold a yearly, well, it's becoming a yearly summit now, somewhere in Europe where you can meet up face to face. And that actually was life-changing. It was the first time actually I'd sat in a room and there was a doctor that did a presentation on different rare conditions. And I thought, actually, because I was diagnosed at birth, no one has ever sat me down and explained this, ever. And equally, I'd never really spoke to anyone else about it and spoke about mental health and kind of had that support system before, other than my parents and my partner, my friends who have no experience either. So it was amazing.
We're not very good at psychological support, I don't think, for people with bleeding disorders. And it sounds like you've had very little. Do you think we should offer that to everybody, or should it be selected people? Or is it that, you know, you've gone out and found a buddy, if you like, someone the same as you in the community that can offer you that support?
Yeah, so I found a buddy, but I would say it should be offered. Clearly, a lot of people with factor V deficiency don't necessarily have severe symptoms. And I think if you're not having severe symptoms at that time, you would then be put in a non-severe clinic where it says that you get all of the support like physio and you get like social work support and all of this. But realistically, you don't. Realistically, that's not offered to you. Like I've had to work really hard to get kind of access to a physio. And as it turns out, after my knee bleed, like my kneecap had been falling out for 4 years. And I only just discovered that the other week. But I think that would have been caught earlier had that been part of when you go in for your review in your clinic.
Yeah. So the Haemophilia Society, that I know you're a member of the board of, have just launched their report about women with bleeding disorders and how they are underserved and overlooked, which sounds very much like that's been your experience. So how do we make that better for, you know, the girls that are coming up now, getting hopefully a diagnosis, and so that they don't have the traumatic story to tell in 10 years' time that you've just told?
I think it honestly really starts with more than one lecture in medical school for people that are going to become GPs. I think for the majority of people that I've spoken to, especially when we've like met up in Europe, it's getting a diagnosis to start with. I think there's still this kind of stigma that everybody just thinks that, oh, I have heavy periods or something. They're like, oh, well, you'll be all right. You're just mourning. Um, and I know that, people have been working on tools on how heavy is too heavy. And I feel like that's only really come about very recently. And I just think,
Yeah.
why are young girls in schools not being taught about this? And then it takes something traumatic. So some people are quite lucky and nothing happens to them. And then they'll give birth and nearly die because of this. And nobody's believed them all of these years. I think it starts at the GP level, listening to the concerns of people. And then I do think when you go to even a centre, there needs to be more education there, um, about rarer conditions and really listening to the patient. I mean, it's only last month a doctor said to me, octoplas it'll only stop the bleeding for like a day. And I was thinking, well, how do you know that? So what evidence is there that this has happened before? And they're like, well, there isn't any. So that's your opinion and it's not mine. Um, and I think it's making sure that patients know, and women know as well, kind of how to advocate for themselves and have the ability to question a doctor. I think especially when you're younger, you just think that they know everything and you just assume what they've said is right. Whereas actually, I could write a novel on all the times that it's wrong, but I think it's more of a discussion because you know your own body as well. And it's about being able to speak to a medical professional appropriately and know what to say.
So how do we then educate girls, young women, older women to have those kinds of conversations? Mums are brilliant at fighting for their children. Why are they not fighting for themselves?
I honestly think that kind of sessions need to be held on advocating for yourself and how to do that. Women have been up and coming for a long time, but I still think in certain settings we are trying to like they try to press us down. I would say, you're just moaning on. Um, well, it's true. And
Yeah.
I feel like there needs to be more of a push to speak up for yourself.
Yeah, I think you're right, and quite how we manage that going forwards into the future with shared decision making that we talk about all the time in haemophilia. We should be doing it across the board, really. So I suppose that sort of leads into the future, and what would you hope for the future for you and for other people with rare bleeding disorders?
Um, I mean, the obvious answer is treatment, like bespoke treatment. It's even just something that one, I would be able to manage myself at home. But two, it would make things like traveling not absolutely terrifying. I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm just touch wood, I'm just lucky it's never happened. That if I had to go to a hospital abroad, they can barely understand what I'm saying in Britain, never mind with a language barrier. And I just think, oh God, I'd just die, I think.
Yeah.
Like, so really that's my hope to have a treatment that is good enough that I wouldn't be scared. Because I think fear is a massive issue, and especially in a lot of people with a rare condition. Because people don't understand you quite often. You can go to A&E with something else, but generally, whatever's wrong will have a bleeding component, and that needs to be considered. And people just go, "Oh, I haven't heard of that." Treatment really would be wonderful. But I realize that that is money, and money that is not going to be spent on a few people.
So I think in some ways you're right in that it would be really almost impossible to do a study that was just for people with severe factor 5 deficiency because if you say you need to get 100 patients, where are we going to find 100 of you from?
Mhm.
But there is, with some of these new treatments that are coming for haemophilia that are rebalancing the way the blood clots, there are ways that would work not just in haemophilia factor 8, factor 9, but across all of the clotting factor deficiencies. Would you be willing to try those treatments if they hadn't been tried specifically in factor 5 deficiency?
I would say yes. I think it's kind of my job too, because otherwise, how will the future generations like have a better life experience? How will the future generations not be terrified to have children? Well, that's just what's got to happen for progress. And I realize it could be really risky and it could totally backfire. But if those of us that exist aren't willing to do it, nothing will ever happen.
So that's kind of real altruism, isn't it, for the future? And that's what I used to hear from the old guys with haemophilia who tried, recombinant factor 8, 20, 30 years ago when it was new and novel. So I think it's really interesting that goes across the bleeding disorders community, not just within the haemophilia community. So you just sort of alluded to not traveling that much.
Well, I do travel. I'm just scared about it.
Would you say, for instance, go off to, I don't know, the depths of Borneo to look at orangutans or something? Or is that a stretch too far for your fear?
Absolutely not. I think when I was younger, I still wouldn't. I remember I once went to the Dominican Republic and I remember telling the hospital I was going to go. And then they were like, oh, maybe you should take something with you. And then they were like, well, there's nothing to take with you. Maybe not then.
Yeah.
And I remember we drove past the hospital, which was like some sort of shack. And honestly, I've never been so careful walking around a pool. But yeah, so I do think there's limitations. There's a lot of things that I will do in the UK that I then just wouldn't do abroad. Like daft things, like I wouldn't go for a run abroad, which I do a lot here.
Yeah.
I used to think I'm like, I'm really, really cool and brave and I'm not scared of anything. But then when I really thought about it, my husband's assessment of me as a health and safety officer is real, but I just didn't realize, if that makes sense.
I think you've just sort of ended very nicely there on the positives of actually being able to live with a rare condition and the hopes that you've got for the future. Thank you, Helen, very much for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Helen. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Haemcast. Join us again soon.